It started with a slam of the front door that would echo through my life for years to come. I'm Emma, 26, and until that day, I thought I understood what family meant. I was scrolling through TikTok after a long day at work, perfectly content in my little bubble of normalcy, when my stepsister Victoria burst into my room like a hurricane. Her mascara was running down her face, and her usually perfect hair was a mess. But what caught me off guard wasn't her appearance. It was the pure hatred in her eyes. "You destroyed everything." She screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. I sat there, my phone forgotten in my lap, trying to process what was happening. Victoria and I had never been close, that's putting it mildly. But this level of hostility was new. "Vic, what are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. That's when she dropped the bomb that would detonate my entire life. "Don't play innocent. I know you've been sleeping with Mark." Her husband of 3 years. My stomach lurched at the accusation. Mark, who I barely spoke to at family gatherings. Mark, whom I actively avoided because Victoria was so possessive. Mark, who honestly bored me to tears with his endless stories about his fantasy football league. "Are you insane?" I managed to choke out. "I've barely said 2 words to Mark in months." But Victoria wasn't listening. She was on a roll, tears streaming down her face as she spewed accusations. "I saw the texts. I know all about your little secret meetings. Before I could defend myself, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My dad and stepmom, Patricia, appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. One look at Victoria's tear-stained face and Patricia rushed to her side. "Honey, what's wrong?" she asked, wrapping an arm around Victoria's shoulders. Victoria turned to them, her voice trembling with what I now know was fake emotion. "Emma's been having an affair with Mark. I have proof. The look on my dad's face, I'll never forget it. It was like watching every ounce of trust he had in me drain away in an instant. His face turned red, then purple as he turned to me. "Is this true? Of course not!" I shot back, my voice rising with panic. "Dad, you know me. I would never do something like that." But it didn't matter what I said. Victoria had already won. She'd always been the perfect daughter in their eyes, and I was just the reminder of my dad's first marriage, the one who never quite fit into their picture-perfect family. "Don't lie to us," Patricia snapped, holding Victoria closer. "Haven't you caused enough damage?" I looked at my dad, desperately hoping he'd see through this charade. "Dad, please, think about this. When would I even have time to have an affair? I work 60 hours a week. I barely leave the house except for work and grocery shopping. This doesn't make any sense." But he just shook his head, his expression cold and distant. "Pack your things," he said quietly, "and get out, Dot." Those words hit me like a physical blow. "What? You heard me. Pack your things and leave. I won't have someone like you under my roof. Someone like me?" I echoed, my voice breaking. "Dad, I'm your daughter. A daughter who would sleep with her stepsister's husband isn't any daughter of mine," he replied, and each word felt like a knife in my chest. I looked at them all. Victoria's smug expression barely hidden behind her fake tears, Patricia's righteous anger, and my dad's complete betrayal, and realized with crushing clarity that this was it. This was the moment my family chose to believe a lie over me. With shaking hands, I grabbed my backpack and stuffed it with whatever I could grab. Some clothes, my laptop, my phone charger. The whole time, they stood there watching me, like guards making sure a prisoner didn't try to escape with extra privileges. As I walked past them, Victoria whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "I always knew you were jealous of me." I stopped for a moment and turned to look at them one last time. "One day," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "you're all going to realize what a massive mistake you're making. And when that day comes, don't expect me to forgive you." Then I walked out the door, into a world that suddenly felt much colder and much lonelier than it had just an hour ago. I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that my family had just thrown me away based on a lie, and nothing in my life would ever be the same. Standing on the sidewalk outside what used to be my home, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. There was only one person I could think to call, my best friend Amy. She'd always said her couch was mine if I needed it. I just never thought I actually would. As I waited for her to pick up, I watched the lights go out in my old bedroom window and felt the first tears start to fall. This was really happening. This wasn't just a bad dream I could wake up from. This was my new reality. Amy's apartment became my sanctuary that night. She opened her door, took one look at my tear-stained face and packed backpack, and pulled me into a fierce hug. "Tell me everything," she said as she made us both tea, her small studio apartment feeling more like home than my family's house ever had. Through hiccuping sobs, I explained what happened. Victoria accused me of sleeping with Mark? Boring Mark? Amy's eyes widened in disbelief. The same Mark who spent an entire Christmas dinner talking about his stamp collection. Despite everything, I let out a watery laugh. The very same? And your dad just believed her? Without any proof? I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, trying to stop them from shaking. They didn't even ask for proof. Victoria said she had texts, but she never showed them. They just took her word for it. Amy's face darkened. That's messed up, Em. Like seriously messed up. The next few days passed in a blur. I called in sick to work, unable to face the real world just yet. My phone was eerily silent. No calls from Dad, no texts from Patricia. It was like I'd been erased from their lives as easily as deleting a contact. Amy helped me start looking for apartments, but everything in the city was way out of my budget. "You can stay here as long as you need," she insisted, but I knew I couldn't crash on her couch forever. A week after being kicked out, I finally gathered the courage to go back to the house to get more of my things. I chose a time when I knew Dad would be at work and Victoria would be at her yoga class. But when I pulled up, Patricia's car was in the driveway. My hands trembled as I rang the doorbell. Patricia opened it, her face immediately hardening when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" "I need to get my things," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Most of my clothes are still here, my important documents. She crossed her arms. "You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy your sister's marriage." "Stepsister," I corrected automatically. "And I didn't destroy anything. Victoria's lying. Your father and I raised you better than this," Patricia said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "To sleep with a married man? Your own sister's husband? You didn't raise me at all," I snapped, years of pent-up frustration finally boiling over. "My mom raised me. You just showed up when I was 15 and decided you knew what was best for everyone. And now you're choosing to believe your precious Victoria's lies over the truth." Patricia's face turned red. "I think you should leave, not without my things. I'll have your father contact you about arranging a time to collect your belongings." With that, she shut the door in my face. I stood there on the porch, trembling with anger and hurt. Through the window, I could see the family photos on the wall, photos where I always seemed to be standing slightly apart from everyone else, never quite fitting into their perfect family picture. That night back at Amy's, I started making lists. Things I needed to replace, documents I had to somehow get copies of, a budget for starting over. Amy watched me from her tiny kitchen where she was making dinner. "You know what bothers me?" she said, stirring something that smelled like mac and cheese. "Victoria's always been jealous of you, not the other way around." I looked up from my notebook. "What do you mean? Think about it. You're successful, independent, and people genuinely like you. Victoria's always been, well, Victoria, the kind of person who peaks in high school and never moves forward." She had a point. Victoria, at 24, still lived at home. She dropped out of college after one semester, claiming it was too stressful. Her only job was part-time at a boutique owned by one of Patricia's friends. Meanwhile, I'd worked my way through college, gotten a good job in marketing, and was saving for my own place. "Maybe," I said slowly. "But it doesn't matter now. They've made their choice." Amy sat down next to me on the couch, placing a bowl of mac and cheese in front of me. "So make yours. Show them what they lost." That night, as I lay on Amy's surprisingly comfortable couch, I made a decision. I couldn't change what Victoria had done. I couldn't force my family to believe the truth, but I could control what happened next. I opened my laptop and started apartment hunting again, this time looking in areas I hadn't considered before. Found some job listings that might offer better pay. I started researching how to get copies of my birth certificate and other documents. I was done being the family scapegoat, done trying to fit into a picture where I was never wanted. It was time to create my own story, even if I had to start from scratch. What I didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. Victoria's lie was about to unravel in ways none of us could have predicted, and karma was waiting patiently in the wings. They say time heals all wounds, but whoever said that never had their entire family turn against them based on a lie. 3 months after being kicked out, I was surviving, literally. I'd found a tiny studio apartment in a part of town that my stepmom would probably call sketchy, but it was mine. The kitchen was basically a hot plate and a mini fridge. The bathroom had seen better days, probably sometime during the Carter administration, and my bed took up most of the living space. But every time I unlocked that door, I felt a small surge of pride. This was my space, earned with my own money, where no one could throw me out based on lies. Amy helped me furnish it with thrift store finds and Facebook marketplace bargains. We made a game of it, trying to see who could find the most ridiculous deals. The floral armchair that smelled faintly of mothballs, $5. The wobbly coffee table that we fixed with some wood glue, free, picked up from someone's curb. It's very bohemian, Amy said diplomatically when we finished setting everything up. I laughed. That's a nice way of saying it looks like a college dorm threw up in here. But it was home, my home. Work became my escape. I threw myself into projects, picked up extra assignments, and stayed late at the office. My boss noticed. She even gave me a small raise, which helped with the rent. But the nights were the hardest. In the quiet of my tiny apartment, with only the sound of the temperamental radiator for company, the memories would come flooding back. The look on my dad's face when he told me to leave, Victoria's smug smile behind her fake tears, Patricia's righteous anger. I tried reaching out to Dad once, about a month after everything happened. I called early on a Sunday morning knowing he'd be the only one awake, doing his crossword puzzle like he always did. He answered on the 4th ring, "Dad?" My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. There was a long pause. "Can we talk, please? I miss you, and if you just listen..." "I can't do this," he cut me off. "Victoria's still devastated. Mark moved out last week. This family has been through enough, but I didn't..." "Goodbye, Emma." The dial tone felt like a slap in the face. Later that day, I got a text from Victoria. "Stop trying to contact Dad. Haven't you done enough damage?" I blocked her number. It was strange, watching my life continue while feeling like I was stuck in amber. I went to work, paid my bills, and even started going to a weekly yoga class at the community center. But everything felt hollow, like I was just going through the motions. Then one day, about 4 months after being kicked out, something shifted. I was walking home from work when I passed the house, my old house. I didn't mean to walk that way. It just happens sometimes, like picking at a scab you know you should leave alone. Victoria was outside, loading boxes into her car. She looked different, thinner, more frantic. When she saw me, she froze for a moment, then quickly looked away, almost guiltily. I kept walking, but that moment stuck with me. That flash of guilt in her eyes, it was the first crack in her perfect facade. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about Victoria's expression kept nagging at me. I pulled out my laptop and did something I probably should have done months ago. I started digging. Social media was my first stop. Victoria had blocked me, of course, but her profiles were public. Scrolling through her recent posts, I noticed something odd. There were no pictures of Mark, no mentions of him at all, for almost a year before everything happened. Then I found it, buried in the comments of an old photo. Someone had written, "Hey V, saw Tom at the coffee shop today. You two are so cute together." The name tickled something in my memory. Wasn't that the guy from Victoria's yoga studio? The one she was always talking about before? Oh. The pieces started falling into place. The sudden accusation, the convenient lack of proof, the way she'd been so quick to paint me as the villain. Victoria hadn't accused me of sleeping with Mark to cover up my affair. She'd accused me to cover up her own. I sat back in my wobbly chair, letting the revelation wash over me. Part of me wanted to laugh at the sheer audacity of it. Another part wanted to cry, but mostly I felt a strange sense of calm because now I knew the truth. And sooner or later, everyone else would too. I picked up my phone and opened my email. For a long moment, I stared at the blank compose screen, cursor blinking. Then I started typing, "Dear Mark, I think there's something you should know, ... The truth was about to come out, and this time I wasn't going to be the one paying the price for Victoria's lies. I didn't hear back from Mark for 2 weeks. Long enough that I'd started to think my email had gone to his spam folder, or that he'd dismissed it as the desperate attempts of the other woman to clear her name. Then, on a random Tuesday evening, my phone lit up with an unknown number. Emma. Mark's voice was hesitant, tired. "We need to talk." We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. Mark looked awful, like he hadn't slept in months. His usually crisp button-down was wrinkled, and his hair needed a cut. "I've been doing some digging since your email," he said, stirring his untouched coffee. "You were right about everything." He pulled out his phone and started showing me what he'd found. Pictures of Victoria with Tom going back over a year. Text messages he'd discovered on their shared iPad. Hotel receipts. "She didn't even try that hard to hide it," he said with a bitter laugh. "I guess she thought I was too stupid to notice. And then when I started asking questions, she panicked and blamed me." I finished. He nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm sorry, Emma. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have defended you when all this first happened. I was so angry and hurt. It was easier to believe her lies." I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. "What are you going to do?" "I've already done it. Filed for divorce last week, but there's more." He hesitated, then pulled out a USB drive. "Everything's on here. The proof of her affair, the fake text she created to frame you, everything. Do what you want with it." I took the drive with trembling hands. "Thank you. Don't thank me," he said, standing up. "Just make it right." I spent that night going through everything on the drive. Victoria's deception was even more elaborate than I'd imagined. She'd actually created fake text messages between Mark and me using some app, complete with manufactured dates and times. She'd built an entire false narrative piece by piece just to cover her tracks. The next morning, I forwarded everything to my dad's email. 3 hours later, my phone rang. It was him, Emma. His voice broke. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. "Just listen." I told him everything. About how it felt to be thrown out of my home based on lies. About struggling to rebuild my life while carrying the weight of their betrayal. About how not one of them had bothered to ask for my side of the story. "We were wrong," he said finally. "So terribly wrong. Can you come over? Please? We need to talk about this as a family." I almost laughed. "Family? You kicked me out of the family the moment you chose to believe Victoria's lies. You can't just snap your fingers and make that go away. Please, Emma, let us try to make this right." I agreed to come over that evening, more out of curiosity than any desire for reconciliation. When I arrived, the scene was exactly what I'd expected. Victoria was there, mascara running down her face, real tears this time. Patricia looked shell-shocked. Dad couldn't meet my eyes. "I can explain," Victoria started, but I cut her off. "Explain what? How you cheated on your husband and then blamed me to cover it up? How you destroyed my relationship with my family to protect your lies? Please explain. I'd love to hear it. She crumpled into tears. Patricia moved to comfort her, but Dad stopped her. "No," he said firmly. "Not this time." Victoria looked up, startled. It was probably the first time in her life that Patricia hadn't rushed to her defense. "What you did," Dad continued, his voice shaking, "was unforgivable. You didn't just lie. You deliberately destroyed your stepsister's life to cover up your own mistakes." "I didn't mean—" Victoria started. "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew they'd believe you over me. You knew they'd kick me out. You counted on it. The silence that followed was deafening." "We should have believed you," Dad said quietly. "Should have listened. Should have been my family," I finished. "But you weren't, and now I don't know if you can be." Victoria started sobbing harder. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. Dad just stood there, years of regret etched on his face. "Get out," he said suddenly. We all looked at him in shock. Victoria whimpered. "Get out," he repeated louder this time. "Pack your things and leave." Now Victoria turned to Patricia, expecting her usual rescue. But Patricia just shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You heard your stepfather," she whispered. "Pack your things." As Victoria stumbled upstairs to pack, Dad turned to me. "This doesn't fix anything," he said. "We know that, but maybe it's a start." I looked around the house. My childhood home, the place I'd been thrown out of just months ago. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. "Maybe," I said. "But I'm not moving back. I have my own place now, my own life." "We understand," Patricia said softly. We We'd like to be part of that life. If you'll let us?" I didn't have an answer for them. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the door, pausing before I left. "The truth always comes out," I said. "Remember that next time you're quick to judge." As I drove home to my tiny apartment, I felt lighter somehow. The truth was out, justice had been served, and Victoria was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But the story wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. They say karma comes for everyone eventually. For Victoria, it came like a tsunami, washing away everything she'd built her life on. A month after the confrontation, Amy texted me a screenshot from Instagram. Victoria, it seemed, had become something of a pariah in our small suburban community. The truth about her affair with Tom had spread like wildfire. These things always happen in places where people have too much time and too little to talk about. Guess who just got kicked out of her yoga studio? Amy's text read, "Apparently Tom's wife owns the place. Awkward." I shouldn't have felt satisfied by her downfall, but I did. Every bit of news about Victoria's crumbling social life felt like a small victory. Her friends stopped inviting her to their gatherings. The boutique where she worked restructured her position right out of existence. Even her loyal Instagram followers started unfollowing her in droves. Dad kept trying to rebuild our relationship. He'd call every few days and send texts asking how I was doing. Sometimes I'd respond, sometimes I wouldn't. Patricia sent cards, actual physical cards with long, handwritten apologies. They were trying. I had to give them that. One evening, about 6 months after everything came to light, I was sitting in my tiny apartment when my phone buzzed. "Unknown number, Emma?" Victoria's voice was small and broken. "Please don't hang up." I should have, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" She took a shaky breath. "I'm staying at Aunt Susan's place in Ohio. Dad and Patricia. They haven't spoken to me since they kicked me out. Mark's divorce attorney is destroying me. Tom won't return my calls. I lost everything. Funny how that works," I said coldly. "Losing everything." "I know I messed up," she whispered. "I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I am. Sorry, I never thought you'd get caught." I finished. "Never thought your perfect little life would fall apart. I never thought you'd end up exactly where you tried to put me." She started crying. Once upon a time, those tears would have moved me. Not anymore. I don't know how to fix this," she admitted. "Maybe you can't," I replied. "Maybe some things stay broken, After I hung up, I sat on my secondhand couch, thinking about everything that had happened, about how one lie had created a domino effect that changed so many lives. The truth, when it finally came out, was both vindication and devastation. A week later, Dad invited me to dinner, just him and me at the diner we used to go to when I was a kid. I agreed, more out of exhaustion than forgiveness. "I failed you," he said over his untouched burger. "When you needed me most, I failed you, and I don't know if I can ever make that right." I pushed my fries around my plate. "You believed her because it was easier, because Victoria and Patricia were your new family, and I was just a reminder of your old life," he said firmly. "I believed her because I was a coward, because facing the truth about Victoria meant facing the truth about a lot of things, about how I'd let Patricia coddle her, about how I'd pushed you aside to keep the peace, about how I'd been a terrible father." For the first time since this whole mess started, I saw real remorse in his eyes. "I miss you, Emma," he continued. "I miss my daughter. And I know I have no right to ask, but can we try to rebuild something?" I thought about Victoria, alone in Ohio, reaping what she'd sown. I thought about Patricia, sending her an endless stream of apology cards. I thought about my dad sitting here, finally owning up to his mistakes. "I can't go back," I said slowly. "Can't pretend none of this happened. Can't be the daughter who just forgives and forgets, He nodded, shoulders slumping. "But," I continued, "maybe we can go forward, slowly, on my terms." His eyes lit up with hope. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes." We spent the next hour talking, really talking, about everything that had happened. About the hurt, the betrayal, the long road ahead. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. As I drove home that night, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to a year ago. My apartment was still tiny, but it felt like home. My job had promoted me. It turns out throwing yourself into work sometimes pays off. And while my family wasn't what it used to be, maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The truth had come out, just like I knew it would. Victoria had lost everything, just like she deserved to. But the biggest truth I learned wasn't about her lies or my family's betrayal. It was about me. I learned that I was stronger than I ever thought possible, that I could rebuild my life from nothing, that sometimes the family you choose, like Amy, who never doubted me for a second, is worth more than the family you're born into. Victoria's lie was meant to destroy me. Instead, it set me free. Free from trying to fit into a family that never really wanted me. Free from seeking approval from people who didn't deserve my trust. Free to build my own life on my own terms. Last week, I got another call from Victoria. I let it go to voicemail. Maybe someday I'll be ready to hear what she has to say. Maybe someday I'll find it in my heart to forgive her. But for now, I'm focusing on my own story because, in the end, that's what this was all about. Not Victoria's lie, not my family's betrayal, but my truth, my strength, my resilience, and that's a story worth telling.